Krista Skupik, and this is Forum Daily for Tuesday, February 10th. U.S. President Donald Trump is threatening to not allow a new bridge between Windsor, Ontario, and Detroit, Michigan to open unless the United States is fully compensated for everything it has given Canada. Trump claimed in a Truth Social post on Monday that Canada has taken advantage of America, saying the U.S. should own at least one half of the bridge because the revenues generated because of the U.S. market will be astronomical. The U.S. president continued on in the post criticizing a lack of income for America in exchange for the opening of the Gordie Howe Bridge, specifically citing Ontario's decision to pull U.S. spirits and other American-made alcoholic products from store shelves. The bridge is publicly co-owned by Canada and the state of Michigan, with Canada funding the entire project and recouping costs by invoking tolls on those who use the bridge. These comments from the U.S. president come during a time where Canada and China are deepening economic ties, an agreement Trump has been a vocal critic of. Prime Minister Mark Carney spoke to reporters this morning following a conversation with the U.S. president yesterday.
We discussed a number of issues, international issues. Thirdly, we discussed the bridge. I explained that Canada, of course, paid for the construction of the bridge, over $4 billion, that the ownership is shared between the state of Michigan and the government of Canada, and that in the construction of the bridge, obviously there's Canadian steel, Canadian workers, but also U.S. steel, U.S. workers that are involved. This is a great example of cooperation between our countries. Look forward to it opening. And what is particularly important, of course, is the commerce and the tourism and the voyages of Canadians and Americans that will go across that bridge. So the conversation turned to a series of issues that we will raise and we're going to follow up on. I'm not going to go into detail on those issues. These would be specific issues in parallel to the CUSMA negotiations. Final point is the president asked appropriately that his ambassador, who's from Michigan, of course, play a role in smoothing the conversation in and around the bridge. So it was a positive conversation. It's a big game today, and we're going to win.
I'm now joined by our contributor, David Clement, for more on what the president is threatening. Now, David, first off, what is actually being threatened here, and why is this happening right now?
Yeah, so there are essentially two ways to look at it. The kind of more optimistic way to look at it, or charitable way, is that Trump has found something to re-engage his primary issues on. So things like the Chinese EVs, Doug Ford pulling U.S. products off the grocery shelves. That would be kind of the optimistic view or charitable view. The more pessimistic view is possibly some lobbying on behalf of the family who owns the Ambassador Bridge, who they've owned since it was built, which is the primary transit way for all trucks and all trade going from Windsor to Detroit. They've long opposed the building of any new bridge, arguing that it's going to impact their revenue and bottom line, which is, of course, true. So it's unclear as to which option is the most accurate. But I do think it's interesting because our negotiations with Trump have, for a long time, kind of felt like the scene from The Notebook, where Ryan Gosling is asking what she wants, and she's like, it's not that simple, and she can't answer. We went through that loop of like, oh, it was cartels, it was drugs, it was NATO defense spending. It somewhat does feel like we are really narrowing in on what some of the core issues are, alcohol being one of them. And I think that is maybe a little bit of a silver lining in terms of what's moving forward. But the threat from Trump is interesting because realistically, there's not much he can do to stop it from opening other than not staffing the U.S. customs side of it.
Right.
So not having Border Patrol agents, which would effectively close the bridge. But in terms of being compensated, the costs of that are peanuts in comparison. And it's generally just border security costs, which the Trump administration has been all in on anyway. So it's not it's not some big cost that the U.S. is shouldering. And once the costs are recouped from tolls, it is co-owned, as the Prime Minister said, between Canada and the state of Michigan. And I mean, the last time I checked, Michigan was part of the United States. So it's not like there is no benefit. realistically, I could only see the only serious grievance he could have is that the project went way over budget
Mhm.
from what was originally proposed, which means that the timeline for Michigan to get its share is longer. That isn't what he said, but if there was any legitimate grievance or criticism of the bridge beyond the private interest with the Ambassador Bridge, that would probably be it.
Mhm. And what would the economic impacts be if the bridge were to be blocked or delayed for both Windsor and Detroit?
Yeah, I mean, it would be massive. So the Windsor-Detroit corridor is the busiest of all truck routes going north-south in the country.
Mhm.
Something around 30% of all Canada-US trade transported by truck goes over the Ambassador Bridge. So it is huge. We're talking $140 billion in annual trade. And what the root of the issue is that because there's only one, or really only one, the bottleneck there is significant and the congestion there is significant. And it's cliche to say it, but time is money. The longer you have trucks waiting, the more costs build up. And I mean, there was a study that was put out in terms of projected losses. So if the Gordie Howe Bridge doesn't open, the projected losses from congestion alone were anywhere from 6.3 billion to 40 billion if we didn't address this by 2030. So we're talking about a huge economic cost at our busiest transport option between Canada and the United States. So the economic cost would be massive.
And how much do you think Trump's latest threat actually has to do with the fact that China and Canada have been working out some sort of a trade deal?
It's complicated because it depends on what day we're referring to Donald Trump, right? Right after the deal was done with China, he said, well, good, Mark Carney's doing what he's supposed to be doing. And then there was a reversal. You've had Howard Lutnick say one thing and the president say another. We've talked about this before. There's no message discipline, right? Scott Bessent said he's worried about Chinese EVs crossing the border and Canada kind of being a backdoor. But these are finished products for the most part, at least for now, right? There is no indication that these EVs are going to be magically made in Canada and then become part of the interwoven parts network that we have. So if there is concern about Chinese EVs crossing the border into the United States, that's like 8 to 10 years away, hypothetically, not even remotely close to the rest of the Trump administration.
Mhm.
So the whole China argument is bizarre to me because Trump has been a vocal critic of China while also saying that he really likes Xi Jinping and trying to make his own deal with China. So it's really unclear. I do think that the US alcohol limitations are an issue that is going to continue to come up.
Right.
And other provinces have already gotten rid of it. Quebec has abandoned their ban. And so there have been a lot of people, myself included, saying, okay, Ontario, like, we got it. You did what you did, but let's move on and try and smooth this over.
Now, why would President Trump fast track this bridge like he did 9 years ago if 9 years later he was going to just choose to either block it or stop the construction altogether?
And this, again, this is like, there are multiple moments where it's almost as if he's forgotten that he was president,
Mhm.
right? The USMCA is the worst deal. Well, he negotiated it. This bridge is a bad deal, but he allocated the original $15 million in funding for the border staff. So you can't have it both ways. And then I think it really just goes back into the two possible buckets of where the criticism is coming from. It's either coming from kind of backroom lobbying from the owners of the Ambassador Bridge, or this is just a useful distraction to raise the real issues that they're concerned about, with alcohol being one of the big ones. And we know that the impact, because for Ontario, for an example, is the largest buyer of alcohol in the world. When the LCBO cuts you off, that does a lot of damage to things like the bourbon industry, California wines. It makes sense. That's a pretty serious grievance. And so it just depends on whether you're giving Trump the kind of charitable view or the uncharitable view. So we'll see what happens from here.
Now, on Ontario, Premier Doug Ford came out today and said that he's confident that this bridge is going to get built and it's going to happen. What do you think makes Doug Ford so confident when Donald Trump did just threat that it's not going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I just think because the facts aren't really on the president's side. I mean, it's co-owned with Michigan. They are going to get their share of the revenue once the costs are recouped. I mean, it's a great example of what has traditionally been that really positive cross-border collaboration. The Chamber of Commerce in Michigan wants it. The governor wants it. In 2012, they put it to a vote, and it won 60-40 in favor of it. So there just isn't a lot there to actually keep it closed.
Well, David, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you.
Prime Minister Mark Carney welcomed Luxembourg's Prime Minister Luc Frieden to Ottawa on Monday. The Prime Minister welcomed Luxembourg's Prime Minister and his wife to Canada, where they discussed a variety of topics from finance to defense. Before their meeting, Carney and Frieden spoke to the press briefly to outline the topics that they intended to discuss and highlight Canada's friendship with both Luxembourg and Europe.
Thank you very much, dear Prime Minister, dear Mark. It's a great honor for us to be here today, and not simply because it's nice to be in Canada to see the sun and the snow, but your voice is heard and appreciated in Europe. And so it is for us very clear that through the voice of the Canadian Prime Minister, Canada plays a key role in our thinking about the future of Europe and the world. We both believe in a rules-based international order. We believe that countries must work together on the basis of fundamental values and principles, those that are enshrined in the UN Charter. And therefore I'm very grateful that we could exchange on those basic principles, how to bring them forward. And we are very grateful for your leadership. That leadership expands far beyond the North American continent. We appreciate each time we come to Europe when we talk about the future of Ukraine, because the fundamental principles of the UN Charter are challenged in Ukraine, they are challenged in the Arctic, and so therefore we value very much this friendship between Europe and Canada and Luxembourg and Canada.
And Prime Minister Mark Carney has plans for another trip as Canada works to update its defense policy. Carney is expected to travel to Munich later this week for the world's top security conference, and he will be in Germany until Sunday. Heads of government who attend the Munich Security Conference will discuss major issues in defense at a time when U.S. President Donald Trump has disrupted the global order. Trump ordered the capture of a Venezuelan president at the start of the year, and his threats to acquire the Danish territory of Greenland by force put the NATO military alliance at risk. In the House of Commons today, the opposition Conservatives introduced a motion to bar non-citizens from making refugee claims if they've been convicted of serious crimes or if their criminal cases are still being processed in the courts. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says that non-citizens who commit serious crimes must be forced to leave our country. BC Premier David Eby and several big city mayors have also pushed Ottawa to close what they call loopholes around asylum claims following a significant rise in extortion violence. Justice Minister Sean Fraser spoke with reporters today about the extortion issues in Canada.
Well, I think we got to start with recognizing that extortion is a very real and significant problem, and what we're seeing in Surrey is completely unacceptable. Now, there are already tough laws in the book, certainly, but we want to do more. Our Bail and Sentencing Reform Act, in two different ways, on both bail and sentencing, will adopt tougher laws when it comes to extortion. My colleague in public safety is launching an initiative to support some of the work of law enforcement on the ground, but we also need to listen to law enforcement. They are saying they want the tools, not just to punish bad actors after a crime has been committed, but to bust extortion rings. They're specifically acts, and in fact, Patrick Brown from Brampton said the Peel Regional Police, which is dealing with a similar set of circumstances, has said that his message to me directly from the police is to pass a Strong Borders Act. Give the police the authorities that they need to actually bust extortion rings, to launch their investigations and prosecute criminals who are taking part in sophisticated crime rings. There are solutions on the table, but we need all parties to collaborate and stop obstructing in the House to actually help do what we can federally to bust up these extortion rings and deliver safety to communities.
Rob Lance was sworn in as the Premier of Prince Edward Island on Monday after winning the permanent leadership of the province's Progressive Conservative Party over the weekend.
I, Robert Lance, swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles III, his heirs and successors according to law. I further swear that I will serve His Majesty faithfully and honestly, and that I will to the best of my skill, knowledge, and judgment, execute the laws of this province and the responsibilities, powers, and trusts granted to me as Premier, President of the Executive Council, Minister responsible for intergovernmental affairs, and Minister responsible for Indigenous relations for Prince Edward Island. And I further swear that I will keep confidential all matters addressed by the Executive Council, and that I will not disclose any such matters to any person other than a member of the Executive Council, except as authorized by it or as required in the lawful discharge of my duties.
Your Honour, do you place in trust of Premier Lance the Great Seal of the province as a symbol of the authority you vest in the government?
The Great Seal of the province is a symbol of the authority vested by me in the government of Prince Edward Island. I place it in your trust as you undertake your duties as leader of the government.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Lance previously served as Premier and interim PC party leader for about 9 months following Dennis King's surprise resignation in February 2025. He stepped down from both roles in December so he could run for permanent leadership of the party. Lance won a tightly contested leadership race against Mark Ledwell over the weekend, winning with a margin of over 350 votes, taking home 53% of the votes. During the race, Lance outlined energy capacity to be one of the main issues his government would focus on in negotiations with Ottawa, hoping for underseas cables and existing cable upgrades to be marked as a nation-building project. In an effort to ease range anxiety and encourage more Canadians to switch to electric vehicles, the federal government is committing new funding to expand the country's EV charging network. The Ministers of Environment, Energy and Transport announced $84.4 million for the installation of more than 8,000 new chargers nationwide, aimed at making it easier for drivers to plug in at home, at work, and on the road. The government is also putting another $5.7 million towards 3 projects under the Green Freight program, which helps reduce emissions from the trucking sector through measures such as the use of low-carbon fuels.
To help the industry adapt, grow, and diversify into new markets, the government is dedicating $3 billion from the Strategic Response Fund, along with $100 million from the Regional Tariff Response Initiative. We are also providing additional income support through the new work-sharing grant program, ensuring workers can stay connected to their jobs as companies adjust to changing market conditions. And to ensure Canadian manufacturers have fair access to their own domestic market, Canada is maintaining counter tariffs on auto imports from the United States. Second, our strategy is about incentivizing businesses to build and invest in Canada. We are launching consultations to strengthen Canada's automotive remission framework and exploring a tradable credit system that rewards companies that produce and invest here at home in Canada. Through Budget 2025, we are reducing costs for manufacturers by introducing the productivity super deduction, leveraging refundable investment tax credits for clean technologies and electric vehicles, and lowering corporate tax rates for zero-emission technology manufacturers.
Conservative MP Arpan Khanna is calling on the Carney government to provide tax relief to General Motors workers who receive severance pay after losing their jobs at the Kami assembly plant in Ingersoll, Ontario. General Motors announced last fall that it would be shutting down operations at the plant, a move that affected hundreds of workers and sent shockwaves through the small southwestern Ontario community. Khanna says while the severance package offered some short-term financial help, workers are now facing an unexpected burden when it comes time to pay taxes on that income.
The sad news we heard last year with the plant closing has had a devastating effect in our communities. 1,200 workers were laid off. That's 1,200 families being affected. I often hear stories at the Kami plant of couples working together, multi-generations, working side by side on the assembly line. And there's the ripple effect of tens of thousands of spin-off jobs that are being impacted. So these jobs have a major impact in our community. But just last week, they received some more bad news. As the GM payouts started rolling out, the workers opened up their pay stub to notice that over 50% of their payouts were being withheld for taxes. Now you can imagine, in an affordability crisis like we're seeing today, what kind of impact that would have on their families. These workers have called me and told me that it feels like they're being kicked down while they've already been on the floor. They are now struggling to put food on their tables. They're struggling to pay mortgages, rent, and also plan for their kids' summer sports.
A press release from Air Canada has announced that the company is suspending all flights to Cuba due to the country's ongoing fuel shortages. The airline will only be operating return flights, aiming to return roughly 3,000 passengers who were vacationing on the island. This comes after Cuban aviation officials advised airlines that they lack enough fuel to meet demand for the flights arriving to the island. The last time such strict fuel rationing occurred in Cuba was over a decade ago. Air Canada put out a press release stating that February 10th would be the final day that aviation fuel will be commercially available in Cuba, and the airline will be loading extra fuel and making increased technical stops when necessary. These shortages add increased stress to the island while Mexico halts all oil shipments to the country and Cuba is targeted by Trump administration with tariffs. Buckingham Palace says King Charles will support UK police assessing reports that the former Prince Andrew gave confidential information to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The statement came after Thames Valley Police said yesterday it was assessing reports that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor sent trade reports to Epstein in 2010. Meantime, U.S. Congress members who have been given access to the unredacted version of the Epstein files say they've seen the names of 6 men they allege are implicated, including someone pretty high up in a foreign government. And U.S. House lawmakers have tried to interview Ghislaine Maxwell via video from her prison camp in Texas. But the ex-girlfriend and confidant of Jeffrey Epstein repeatedly invoked her Fifth Amendment rights to avoid answering questions that would be incriminating. Her lawyer also told the House Oversight Committee that if President Donald Trump ended her prison sentence, she'd be willing to testify that neither Trump nor former President Bill Clinton were guilty for any wrongdoing in their relationships with Epstein. Legal expert Nima Rahmani commented on Ghislaine Maxwell, who declined to answer on an in-house deposition. Rahmani says Maxwell has every right to remain silent when it comes to her relationship with Jeffrey Epstein.
It's clear that she is trying to use her knowledge and her association with Jeffrey Epstein and the fact that members of Congress and the American public want answers to try to get a pardon out of President Trump. Now, just like Maxwell has an absolute right to remain silent, Trump has an unfettered right to pardon anyone convicted of a federal crime. It doesn't appear that he is entertaining that possibility, but the president has been very liberal with pardons and somewhat unpredictable. So it's certainly a possibility, even though it doesn't seem very likely. Maxwell asserting her Fifth Amendment privilege today was somewhat of a surprise, given that she had provided statements earlier. The question everyone is asking is, what will former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton do? The fact that they agreed to appear before this committee to avoid contempt of Congress was certainly unprecedented. Will they also assert their Fifth Amendment privilege, or will they provide testimony? We'll have to wait until the end of the month to find out.
An Ontario police watchdog has announced a province-wide inspection of the ability of police services and boards to prevent, detect, and respond to corruption after 7 current Toronto officers were among those charged in an organized crime investigation.
The chief has been clear in his commitment to transparency, cooperation, and to doing the work that is going to be necessary, doing that work that is required to rebuild trust in our community. His leadership is going to be essential to recommendations coming forward and being implemented in as quick a process as possible. The board, meanwhile, is going to be focused on supporting the Inspector General's work. We will continue to work very closely with the chief to ensure all necessary changes are made to support public safety in the community we serve. We're very excited to hear that an external inspector will be appointed, and we look forward to cooperating fully with that inspector.
I did hear the Inspector General acknowledge the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police being present, and I think that's an important statement how police leaders feel about the need for the sector to work together to do everything we can to address the allegations that emanate from Project South, but importantly, as a sector, come together and prevent any types of occurrences of this nature from ever happening again. I'd also like to acknowledge that we have written to the Law Enforcement Complaints Agency, and I've been advised today that the Law Enforcement Complaints Agency, better known as LECA, is going to be taking responsibility for all allegations related to the Community Safety and Policing Act. This is an independent entity that will investigate the Police Act implications from the allegations that were announced last week and the ongoing investigation that is continuing to be led by the York Regional Police. I would also advise you that as of today, I'll be seeking the suspension without pay for 6 of the 7 members who have been alleged to have committed criminal offenses. We have also deployed additional supervision to where we need to. We're continuing to work to enhance the capacity of professional standards. And we are working to stand up a working group that will look at our internal processes, practices, and everything that we do to ensure that we're responding as quickly as we can, recognizing the work of the Inspector General may take some time. We will support that work.
7 Toronto police officers and 1 retired officer were among 27 suspects charged in an investigation led by York Regional Police. And a massive discovery was made just outside of Tisdale, Saskatchewan. The folks with Canadian Energy Metals Corp out of Calgary found a potentially world-leading alumina deposit that is billions of tons large. It is considered a game changer for North America's aluminum supply chain. Our Western Canada Bureau Chief Hal Roberts caught up with the CEO of Canadian Energy Metals, Chris Hopkins, to find out just how big of a deal this is for Canada.
Chris, 6.8 billion tons of alumina. That's quite the find. How did your team discover it?
Well, it started with a report the government did late in 2016 that indicated there might be some potential for metal content in the shales in eastern Saskatchewan. It was little regarded by anyone, and in 2021, with the advent of COVID, we decided to acquire land in the area and initiate an exploration program there. So that's what came.
That's amazing. So the preliminary economic assessment indicates that the 6.8 billion tons of measured and indicated alumina is equivalent to what? The size of about 1/3 of the known world supply of alumina? That's huge.
That's right. Completely unexpected, but it is, and it's contained within a relatively small area of 16 miles by 16 miles, making it both huge and concentrated.
Now, Saskatchewan already has some pretty solid exports, including potash, durum wheat, canola, and lentils. Could this find all of a sudden make aluminum one of the larger exports coming from Saskatchewan?
Oh, well, according to the premier of the province, it would rate right up there with potash and uranium. Yeah.
Now, you call this project Thor, but it's still in its evaluation stage. What's next for you?
Well, in 2026, we're going to continue assessing the resources. We had a very successful drill program in 2026, drilling another 50% more holes than were in the evaluation. Also, we're going to continue to examine our products. We've identified 2 products that are viable on a commercial basis, and we'll be looking into alumina product SGA, that's smelter grade, as well as scandium and vanadium, 2 other metals that we contain.
Now, we talked about some of the exports, but how about internally as well? How could this really support the aluminum industry within Canada?
Yes, well, by opening up the supply chain to a domestic source of aluminum, we think that this will be have a tremendous impact on the aluminum industry in Canada potentially.
Now, some experts say this could secure a North American supply chain for aluminum and reduce the reliance on foreign sources while providing that greener alternative to existing methods. Can you explain how that might work?
Certainly. By onshoring the supply to North America, of course, currently North American supplies of aluminum, the bauxite that makes the aluminum, come from Africa, from South America, from China. So having a domestic source will make a big difference to the supply chain. Also, the nature of the ore is different. It offers significant economic and environmental benefits in its processing relative to the bauxite that is the alternative.
Chris Hopkins, CEO of Canadian Energy Metals Corp. Thanks so much for your time today.
You're welcome, Hal. Thank you.
A group of healthcare advocates are on Parliament Hill this week trying to get Ottawa's attention and urging the federal government to push back against Alberta's latest move towards private healthcare. The province's united Conservative government, led by Premier Danielle Smith, has passed new legislation that allows surgeons to work in both the public and private systems at the same time. Under the changes, patients who can't afford it would be able to pay out of pocket for procedures like hip and knee replacements or cataract surgery at private clinics. Jason McLean, chair of the Health Coalition, says the new law runs afoul of the Canada Health Act.
Bill 11 brings two-tier American-style healthcare to Alberta. It'll mean that Albertans will experience a system where those who have money will be able to pay to access quicker care, and the rest of us will be left waiting longer or going without. We think that's unacceptable, and it is a clear violation of the Canada Health Act. But Bill 11 is more nefarious than just that. It is also a gift to the private insurance industry, who've been working hand in hand with the Alberta government to make it happen, allowing for the insurance of medically necessary services already covered by our public health plan, and allowing potentially American healthcare companies into Canada, getting a foothold in Alberta, potentially undermining our protections for single-payer healthcare in our trade agreements with the United States and elsewhere. It's urgent that the federal government act on this. We've written to the federal minister, to the government. I know organizations across the country have. Thousands of Albertans and Canadians have written in calling for action, and yet we've had months where the federal government has not taken a stance on what's happening in Alberta. They have not spoken up. And so we're here today, and we're here this week in Ottawa to call on the federal government to do their job, for Mark Carney and his government to speak up, to enforce the Canada Health Act, and to step up to protect our treasured public health care before it is too late.
Commentary about Bad Bunny's Super Bowl halftime show has been everywhere online, but just how popular was it really? The Puerto Rican superstar headlined the Super Bowl 60th halftime show on Sunday, February 8th, delivering a high-production performance that celebrated Puerto Rican culture. But even before he took the stage, the six-time Grammy winner was facing backlash from some conservatives. Critics branded him a Trump hater and un-American, prompting Turning Point USA, the conservative organization founded by the late activist Charlie Kirk, to stage an alternative live stream event called the All-American Halftime Show. Official viewership numbers for Bad Bunny's halftime performance haven't been released yet, but Turning Point USA says its show drew in as many as 6.1 million concurrent viewers on its YouTube channel, according to reporting from The Athletic. But have we seen this kind of feud before over the Super Bowl halftime show? Eric Deggans, Knight Professor of Journalism and Media Ethics at Washington and Lee University, joined us for more.
Oh, well, sure. Just look back 1 year to Kendrick Lamar and his performance during Super Bowl, during that Super Bowl. Then the issue, I think, was more, here's a rapper who's sort of embroiled in a battle with another performer. He's making allegations about that performer in some of his songs. Should the NFL be associated with a style of music that has often been criticized for being violent or for being misogynist? There were a lot of questions that came up then. And similar to Bad Bunny, there were a lot of people in this sort of gigantic mainstream audience that didn't really know Kendrick Lamar, didn't really know his music, didn't really know the hip hop culture that he was coming from. And so they were struggling to sort of understand what they were seeing. But I also think in a very similar way, they were entertained and they realized that it was a spectacle and they could take it in on the level that they could understand it. A sort of a master performer, taking them through his world. And just like with Bad Bunny, I think a lot of people were surprised to find that they enjoyed it and that it was, they learned something from experiencing it.
And what is the commentary from politicians and other public figures in regards to the performance that you've seen so far?
So much of the commentary has been uninformed, and it's been made by people obviously haven't taken the time to get to know Bad Bunny's music or, what he's actually saying in his songs. They're just having a knee-jerk reaction to the idea that an artist who's speaking a language they don't understand, that seems to be from a culture that they don't appreciate, is headlining the biggest stage in pop culture in the moment. And so, I don't have a lot of patience for that kind of knee-jerk reaction. And so I wasn't really clocking exactly what everybody was saying. But, you can look over at Fox News and you could see anchors who were saying things. You could look over on Newsmax and you could see, their top anchor over there was saying, we don't need Bad Bunny, or it's a Bad Bunny. Why do they have a Bad Bunny? There were so many people saying so many things that were frankly ill-informed and ignorant. Also politicians. Basically, I think, I saw one pundit sum it up pretty well. Trump seems to think, and the MAGA conservatives who follow him seem to think that football is their cultural landscape. That when you think about sort of the heart of America and the heart of American pop culture, football is part of that. And so they feel personally threatened when a culture that is not one that they feel comfortable with is centered inside that game or centered inside that structure.
Turning Point has come out and said that they plan to do this again next year. What could this mean for future halftime performances?
I feel like in some ways the American public is so divided that people are looking at the same thing and they're seeing drastically different situations. To me, as a longtime media observer, this Turning Point halftime show is something that is birthed in racism and prejudice and exclusion. Particularly since Jay-Z, the rapper, got involved with helping produce the halftime shows, every halftime performer has been non-white, I think since 2019 or 2020. We've had, I think, 6 straight years where non-white performers have been the feature performers at the halftime show. And I'm sure there are people out there, particularly Trump, particularly MAGA conservatives, who feel some kind of way about that, right? And so now they've decided to build their own halftime because they cannot tolerate sharing the pop culture stage with a culture that they feel is different than theirs. They can't admit or accept that Black culture in America is very close to white culture in America. That, we are siblings in a way, and we can learn from and develop with each other. We can make each other stronger. But if one culture insists on being the dominant voice all the time, everywhere, particularly with population levels headed the way they are, it just doesn't make sense. It holds the culture back. The reason why America is such a powerful country is because for a long time it has figured out how to harness the abilities and the advantages and the intellectual and fiscal power of its immigrants. Germans come, Italians come, Irish come, Japanese come, Chinese come, Latin Americans come. Black people were forced to come, but ultimately we made our way. And all of us have added to the success of America. And as odd as it may sound to say this Turning Point's halftime show is a step in the wrong direction. It's trying to deny the power of unity. When you bring all these cultures together, when you share the spotlight with a culture that's not quite like yours, but is culturally and artistically really powerful. I wish the people who would put so much energy into organizing this alternative would put some energy into understanding why it's so important to have a wide diversity of performers on that official Super Bowl halftime stage. My hope is that this Turning Point's halftime show will be recognized for what it is, which is a refuge for bigots and people who can't accept the future. My fear is that because they have this connection to the presidency and because they have this connection to very powerful systems in America, that they'll get enough financial support to just kind of exist and keep reminding us that there's some backwards folks out there who just can't get with the future.
Canada has won a silver medal in the short track speed skating mixed team relay at the Milan Cortina Olympics. The team finished behind host Italy and ahead of Belgium. This is Canada's third medal overall of this year's Winter Games and its first silver. Also on day 4, Canadian star Mikhail Kingsbury and teammate Julian Veal easily advanced to the free ski men's moguls final. The women's hockey team took on their arch rival United States in the preliminary round, but Captain Marie-Philippe Poulin did not play after an injury in a physical game against Czechia last night. Handle with care. That's the message from gold medalist Breezy Johnson at the Milano Cortina Winter Olympics after she and several other athletes discovered that their medals broke within hours of receiving them. Olympic organizers say that they're now investigating the issue with maximum attention after a number of medals reportedly came loose from their ribbons during celebrations on the opening weekend of the Games.
And there's the ribbon. And here's the little piece that is supposed to go in the ribbon to hold it in the medal. And yeah, it came apart. Don't jump in them. I was jumping in excitement and it broke. I'm sure somebody will fix it. It's not like crazy broken, but it's a little broken.
Siamo a conoscenza della situazione, abbiamo visto le immagini, ovviamente stiamo cercando di capire nel dettaglio se esiste un problema, ma ovviamente abbiamo massima attenzione a questa vicenda, essendo la medaglia il sogno degli atleti, e quindi vogliamo che ovviamente nel momento della consegna tutto sia assolutamente perfetto, perché lo riteniamo davvero il momento più importante, quindi ci stiamo assolutamente lavorando.
And this isn't the first time the quality of Olympic medals has come under scrutiny. Following the 2024 Summer Olympics in Paris, some medals had to be replaced after athletes complained that they were starting to tarnish or corrode, giving them a mottled look likened to crocodile skin. And Canadians are learning more about the death of comedy legend Catherine O'Hara. A Los Angeles County death certificate says the 71-year-old died at a California hospital last month from a pulmonary embolism, with rectal cancer as the underlying cause. The doctor who signed the certificate had been treating O'Hara since March of last year. The Emmy-winning actress became widely known for her comedic roles across the decades, from Kevin's beleaguered mom in Home Alone to the iconic Moira Rose in Schitt's Creek. I'm Teresa Skubic, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. For more news on demand, you can always visit our website at forumdailynews.ca. Good night, Canada.